It was supposed to be just another quiet morning on the edge of town, a moment of stillness before the noise of the day crept in. But fate, as it often does, had a different plan. Sometimes trouble doesn't crash in with sirens or headlines. Sometimes it walks through the door of a small-town diner, in muddy boots and a bad temper. And sometimes the only thing standing between cruelty and kindness is one man who refuses to look away. What happened that morning in Dalton, Georgia, would begin like any other. A little girl doing her homework, a cup of hot coffee, a stranger sipping in silence. But before the clock struck 9, everything would change. And no one, not the girl, not the trucker, not even the man in the hoodie, would walk away the same. Stay with us, because this story doesn't just unfold. It hits hard. And its final note might just stay with you longer than you expect. If this moves you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Some stories deserve to be remembered, not because they're loud, but because they're true. In the corner booth near the window sat a girl named Amira Jordan, just 11 years old, small-framed, but sharp-eyed. Her hair was braided neatly, tied with blue ribbons that matched the stripes on her worn school uniform. A faded backpack rested beside her on the seat, unzipped and spilling out textbooks and a crushed granola bar. Her elbows pressed into the tabletop, eyes focused on a math workbook that looked like it had been used by 2 kids before her. She chewed on the eraser end of a pencil, squinting at a word problem, as if sheer willpower could make the answer appear. Amira wasn't supposed to be up this early, but life didn't wait for comfort. Her mother had already gone off to her second cleaning job, another motel, another hallway of beds to strip and floors to mop. Every morning, before school, her mother dropped her off at Rosie's with a kiss to the forehead and a whispered, "You're my strong girl, always were." The staff at Rosie's had grown used to the sight of Amira quietly working in that booth, sipping hot chocolate and practicing her spelling while the rest of the town slowly woke up. At the back of the diner, sitting alone with a cup of black coffee and a half-read newspaper, was a man no one seemed to notice at first. He wore a weathered hoodie pulled low, jeans faded at the knees, and boots that looked like they'd walked across the country. His hands were rough, veins like old tree roots, and his face, lined and quiet, held a tired kind of strength. His name was Sylvester Stallone. Not Rocky, not Rambo, just Sly. He wasn't here to be recognized. In fact, he wasn't even sure why he had turned off the highway and into this town, except that something about its stillness felt right. He sipped his coffee slowly, eyes half hidden behind reading glasses, but every now and then they drifted toward the girl by the window. There was something familiar in her expression, the way she stared down that math problem, like it was a challenge that wouldn't beat her. She reminded him of his granddaughter, the one he hadn't seen since the divorce, the one he still wrote letters to, even though he didn't know if they were ever opened. Amira caught him watching once and offered a small smile. Sly nodded back, nothing more. He didn't want to interrupt her focus. A few minutes passed. The girl fidgeted with her pencil, then finally gathered enough courage to stand and walk over to his booth, notebook clutched to her chest. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You look like that guy from the boxing movies." "The one my mom watches on VHS." Sly let a slow grin tug at the corner of his mouth. "A lot of old guys look like him. Probably the broken noses and bad backs." Amira giggled nervously. You sound like him, too. He leaned forward just a little. Well, if I were him, I'd ask you to keep that a secret. I'm just trying to enjoy some quiet coffee. She nodded quickly. I can keep secrets. Then, as if suddenly remembering, she held out her notebook. Even if you're not him, would you mind signing this? Just for pretend? Sly looked at the notebook. Creased corners, pencil marks smudged, a page half torn near the back. He opened it to a blank spot and wrote carefully, To Amira, who fights with her mind. Keep going. S. When she read the message, her eyes widened. Thank you, she whispered, hugging the notebook close like it was something sacred. Can I take a picture? He hesitated. He didn't do pictures anymore. But there was something about her. The way she looked at him not as a celebrity, but as a kind of protector, that softened his guard. One photo, he said gently. But only if you promise not to turn me into a meme. She promised, pulled out a cracked iPhone, clicked the picture with his hoodie still half covering his face. Then she skipped back to her booth, grinning like someone who had just met Santa Claus and a superhero in one. For a while, the diner held its usual rhythm. Patsy Cline on the jukebox, the sound of eggs sizzling, the quiet clink of cups against saucers. Then the front door swung open so hard, it slammed the bell off its hook. In stomped a man in a red trucker cap, boots caked with mud, and a scowl that seemed permanent. His name was Rick Danner, known around town for his 18-wheeler and his tendency to turn ugly after 3 beers. He looked like someone who hadn't smiled in years. Rick dropped himself at the counter, slapped a palm on the Formica, and barked, Coffee! None of that frou-frou stuff. Rosie, who'd run the diner since she was 23, poured it without flinching. Morning, Rick, she said, though the word morning seemed to sour in the air when it hit him. He didn't answer, just glared around the diner like it had personally offended him. Then he saw Amira. His scowl deepened. What's she doing here? He asked, loud and ugly. Rosie tensed. She's studying, same as every morning. Let it be. Rick stood up, ignoring her. His boots scraped across the floor like slow threats. He stopped at Amira's booth. She looked up, startled, but not afraid. You think you belong here? He growled. This place used to be clean. Now we got little charity cases taking up tables like they're customers. Amira blinked. I'm just doing my homework, sir. Rick narrowed his eyes. Then, in a moment that felt both sudden and inevitable, he reached across her table, grabbed her small cup of coffee, and dumped it across the pages of her notebook. The liquid soaked through the paper. The message from Stallone bled into a blur of gray. Amira didn't scream, but she gasped, a soft breaking sound that froze the entire diner. Rosie dropped her spatula. The old farmer in the corner stood halfway up. Rick laughed. Oops, he said, smug. And that's when Stallone stood up. He didn't make a show of it. No table slap, no one-liner. He simply rose, walked across the diner, and picked up the dripping notebook from the edge of the table. He looked at the ruined page, then at Rick. You just made a mistake, he said. Rick snorted. What are you going to do, Grandpa? Tell me off like you do in the movies? Sly didn't flinch. You got one chance to walk out of here without my boot print on your back. Rick laughed, swung a wild fist. He missed. Because the man in the hoodie, who'd once fought for everything he had, caught his arm mid-air, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him face first into the counter. The diner exploded in noise. Chairs scraped. Rosie gasped. Rick cried out, pinned and breathless. Amira stared at the man who'd just saved her without saying a word. Sly looked around the diner and said, "Someone call the sheriff." Then he turned back to the little girl, held up her notebook, and said gently, "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll fix it." And in the soft light of that Georgia morning, Amira Jordan smiled, because sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they just drink their coffee black and know exactly when to stand up. The sheriff arrived 15 minutes later in a dust-coated Ford Explorer with a cracked rear-view mirror and a slow-turning engine that groaned like it had seen too many Georgia summers. Deputy Colton, a wiry man with a mustache too thick for his thin face, stepped out first. Sheriff Roy Mathers followed, moving with the weary gait of a man who'd long ago learned that justice was rarely clean and never simple. Rosie met them at the door, still rattled but composed. "It's Rick Danner," she said, voice flat. "He dumped hot coffee on that little girl and tried to swing at a customer. Mr. Stallone took care of it before it got worse." Sheriff Mathers raised an eyebrow at the name, then glanced past her into the diner where Stallone still stood beside Amira's booth. Rick sat slumped against the counter, rubbing his wrist and mumbling curses under his breath. Mathers knew Rick, of course. Everyone in town did. He was the kind of man who barked at waitresses and called it flirting, who left too little tip and too much noise. Rick had 3 priors: public disturbance, resisting arrest, and once throwing a pooled cue at a deputy in a bar up near Jasper. Colton cuffed Rick without ceremony. He grumbled, but didn't resist. Maybe it was the bruise swelling over his cheekbone. Maybe it was the silence in the diner, heavy with judgment. As the sheriff walked over to Stallone, Amira clutched her notebook tighter, eyes flicking nervously between the 2 men. "You all right, miss?" Mathers asked gently, crouching beside her. She nodded, chin trembling slightly, but eyes still steady. "He ruined my notebook," she whispered. "He spilled it on purpose." Mathers looked at the soaked pages, then over to Stallone. "That true?" Stallone nodded once. Girl was minding her business. He walked up, insulted her, poured it right across her things. Then he got loud. I gave him a choice. He made the wrong one. Mathers exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "Yeah, sounds about right. No charges from you?" "Not unless you need me to," Stallone said. "I didn't hit him, just moved him out of the way." "Well," the sheriff muttered, glancing at Rick, who was now whining that he'd been assaulted. "Looks like he'll be explaining himself to the judge again. Probably sober, for once." As they hauled Rick out, Rosie returned to Amira with a fresh cup of hot chocolate and a cloth to dab at the damp backpack. "Sugar," she said, crouching beside her like a grandmother would. "You just keep your head high, you hear? That man's broken in all the places that matter." Amira nodded, blinking back tears, holding on to the only thing she had left, Stallone's words written in pen, now smudged but still visible beneath the stain. The diner slowly returned to normal, or something like it. The farmer resumed his breakfast. Rosie scrubbed the counter with extra force. Stallone sat back down, but didn't touch his coffee. He just watched Amira. The smile she'd worn earlier was gone, replaced with the dull ache of a kid who'd just had something beautiful taken from her. When the sheriff returned a half hour later to finish the paperwork, he paused by Stallone's booth. "Appreciate your restraint," he said, tugging his hat. "Most folks in your shoes would have let that man eat linoleum." Stallone gave a tight nod. "I'm not most folks." "No, sir," the sheriff replied. "You're not." Then he looked toward Amira. That girl? She someone you know? Stallone glanced at her, then shook his head. Not really, but maybe she reminds me of someone I did. He paid for his coffee, left $100 bill under the mug, and walked over to Amira. She looked up, eyes wide, still clutching the ruined notebook like a lifeline. Do you have another one? He asked. She shook her head. That was the only one I had. Mom said we couldn't buy more till next week. Stallone opened his bag and pulled out a small leather notebook, old but unused, the pages crisp and cream-colored. Here, he said, handing it to her. It's not much, but it's clean. Amira took it gently, like it might vanish. Can you sign it again? She asked, barely a whisper. Stallone flipped to the first page and wrote carefully. To Amira, the bravest person in the room. Don't let them dim your light. Sly. She traced the letters with her finger, a soft smile returning to her face. Thank you, she said. Mom's not going to believe this. You don't need her to believe it, he said. You were here. You stood up. That's what matters. As he left the diner, the sun had finally cleared the horizon, casting long golden lines across the pavement. He took a few steps toward his truck, but that feeling, that old weight behind his ribs, started crawling in. The same one he used to feel before a fight, or when something wasn't done. He paused by the driver's side, hands deep in his coat pockets, and turned back toward town. Something told him this wasn't finished. He didn't have to wait long to be proven right. 2 hours later, as he walked down Main Street to clear his head, he passed a convenience store and caught a flash of red through the reflection in the window. Across the street, parked behind a row of old pickups, was a rust-colored 18-wheeler, Danner's rig. And beside it, smoking and pacing, were 2 other men he hadn't seen before. One was tall and thick in the chest, sleeves rolled up to show off prison ink. The other wiry and jittery, chewing a toothpick like it owed him money. The way they kept looking up and down the street told Sly all he needed to know. They weren't here for coffee. He watched from the store window, eyes narrowed, muscles ticking under stillness. Rick must have called in backup. It wasn't pride. It was shame. The kind of bruised ego that made cowards reach for fists when they should be reaching for forgiveness. Stallone kept walking, letting the sidewalk carry him towards the outskirts of town. The sun was higher now, the streets busier, but the space behind him was still too quiet, too measured. He turned into an alleyway between 2 abandoned brick buildings, the kind of place trouble liked to wait in. He stopped in the middle, listening. Behind him, 3 sets of footsteps entered the alley. Rick's voice echoed first. Told you he'd show up alone. The big one spoke next. You sure this is the guy? Old man looks like he's half asleep. He's the one, Rick snarled. He made me look weak, in front of everyone. The third man just cracked his knuckles and said, Then let's put him down easy. Stallone didn't turn around. 3 of you, no warning. That's how you handle your shame? Rick laughed coldly. You're not in the movies now, tough guy. Out here, you bleed like anyone else. Maybe, Sly replied, still calm. But you came looking for pain. I hope you brought enough. The fight didn't last long. The wiry one lunged first, swinging a pipe that whistled through the air. Sly ducked low, grabbed his wrist, and slammed him into the wall with a thud that echoed through the alley. The big one charged next, fists clenched, but his weight worked against him. Sly sidestepped, dropped low, and swept the man's legs out with a heavy kick, then brought his elbow down across the man's collarbone, sending him groaning to the pavement. Rick was last. He hesitated, then swung wild. Sly blocked it with his forearm and sent a fist straight into Rick's stomach, folding him in half. He grabbed the man's jacket and pushed him hard against the brick, eye to eye. "This ends now. You show your face around that girl again, you'll wish it had stopped here." Rick nodded, gasping. Sly released him. The alley smelled like sweat and asphalt. The three men groaned on the ground, broken but breathing. Sly didn't wait. He walked out into the light, heart steady, steps slow. Across the street, people had started gathering, some with phones out, some whispering, some just staring. But Stallone didn't stop. He kept moving, down Main Street, past the diner, past the barbershop, until the town faded into trees and the road stretched long ahead. He didn't know where he was headed, not exactly, but he knew why he was walking. Not for himself. For the girl with the blue ribbons, who deserved better than what the world tried to throw at her that morning. And maybe, just maybe, for the version of himself who'd needed someone like that too, once upon a time. Sylvester Stallone walked for nearly half an hour, past rusted fences, past roadside churches with peeling white paint, and marquees that quoted verses half the town forgot to live by. He walked until the sound of voices faded, and the tension in his shoulders began to settle into something quieter. The sun was climbing high now, casting long shadows of tired telephone poles and pickup trucks that hadn't moved in days. But his thoughts were still tethered to that alley, to the impact of fists and broken breath, and to the look on Rick Danner's face, not fear, not even hate, but the dull bitterness of a man who couldn't accept the weight of his own weakness. He'd seen that look before, too many times, in too many mirrors that weren't his. He wasn't proud of what he'd done, but he wasn't sorry either. Some fights you don't choose. They come to you, snarling, desperate to take something. And sometimes, all you can do is stand your ground. Eventually, he circled back toward the heart of Dalton, where the rhythm of the day had resumed, as if nothing had happened. He passed the post office, the bait shop, the barber shop with a fan blowing hair across the floor, and finally Rosie's diner again. The door chimed as he stepped inside. Rosie glanced up from behind the counter, then nodded toward the corner booth. Amira was back. She sat with her arms wrapped around the new notebook he'd given her, and this time a group of kids surrounded her. A boy with braces and a shirt 2 sizes too big leaned over her shoulder. "Wait, you met him? Like, for real?" Amira nodded proudly and held up the notebook like it was an Olympic medal. He signed it, twice. Another girl with frizzy hair and a shy smile whispered, "Did he fight that guy? The one who poured coffee on you?" Amira looked down at the page, then up again. He didn't fight for fun. He fought because that man was wrong. The kids nodded solemnly, as if the words were bigger than the booth could hold. Stallone stood a moment, unnoticed, then took a few quiet steps toward them. When the group saw him, their eyes widened in unison. Amira grinned wide. "There he is," she beamed. "He came back." Sly smiled, kneeling slowly so he could meet their eyes without towering. "You telling stories about me?" "Only the good parts," Amira said. The boy in the oversized shirt asked, "Is it true you used to be in movies?" Sly chuckled. "Used to be. Now I mostly drink coffee and hope nobody recognizes me." Another kid chimed in. "You beat up that truck guy, didn't you?" Stallone looked at them carefully. "I stopped someone from hurting a friend. That's different from fighting. You get strong, not just by throwing punches, but by knowing when not to. The kids fell quiet. One of them whispered, "I wish someone like you was at our school." Stallone glanced toward Amira. "You've already got someone stronger than me there. She just doesn't know it yet." Amira smiled shyly, eyes lowering. "You're the strong one, though." "Maybe," he said, "but being strong ain't about muscles. It's about standing up when your legs are shaking. It's about opening your mouth when it'd be easier to stay quiet. And you did that today." Rosie brought over a slice of pecan pie and set it in front of Amira with a wink. "On the house, sweetheart. You earned it." Amira blinked. "Really?" Rosie leaned in. "Most grown folks wouldn't have stood up to a man like that. But you did. That says a whole lot." Stallone took a seat nearby, sipping fresh coffee, watching as the kids slowly dispersed, and Amira settled into her slice of pie. Her legs swung beneath the booth. Her notebook sat beside her like a holy book. For a while, they didn't talk, just shared space, shared stillness. Then Amira asked quietly, "Did you always know how to fight?" Stallone smiled, his voice low. "Number I learned because life didn't give me a choice. Grew up in Philly. My dad hit more than he hugged. School was rough. Didn't have much. Didn't feel like much either. But then I found the gym, and writing, and eventually I found people who believed in me more than I believed in myself." She asked, "Were you ever scared?" "Every day," he said. "Fear isn't weakness, Amira. It's just proof that you care about what you might lose. But what you do with that fear, that's what counts." A long pause passed between them, filled with something unspoken but understood. Then the diner door creaked again. A man in a brown uniform stepped in, holding a clipboard. It was Deputy Colton. "Mr. Stallone?" Sly stood slowly. "That's me." "Sheriff asked me to deliver this," Colton said, handing him a folded note. "Also, word got around about what happened in that alley. A couple of folks saw it go down. We won't be seeing Danner for a while. He and his buddies are being charged with assault, unlawful intimidation, and conspiracy. Sheriff says you're in the clear." Stallone nodded, reading the note. It was a simple thank you from Mathers. At the bottom, scrawled in blue ink, were the words, "There's more good than bad out here, but the bad's louder. Thanks for reminding us." Colton tipped his hat and left. Stallone folded the note and slid it into his jacket. He turned to Amira. "Looks like your friend won't be bothering anyone for a long time." She exhaled, as if something heavy inside her had been lifted. "Does this mean it's over?" "For now," he said. "But the world doesn't run out of trouble, Amira. That's why we need people like you, people who don't look away." She nodded slowly, taking it in. "Do you think I can be strong like you someday?" He smiled gently. "You already are. The kind of strong that changes rooms, that makes people pause and listen." He stood to leave. Amira followed him to the door, clutching her notebook like it carried her whole heart inside. "Will I see you again?" she asked. He hesitated. The years had taught him that promises were heavy things, but he knelt down and looked her in the eye. "Maybe not in this town, but I hope one day, when you're helping someone else, the way you stood up today, you'll remember this morning and know I'm proud of you. That's the kind of presence that lasts longer than being in the same room." Amira nodded. "I'll remember." He rose, tipped his cap, and walked out into the afternoon sun, the town folding back into its slow rhythm behind him. The wind carried the faint scent of coffee, dust, and blooming dogwoods. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. As Stallone crossed the street, he passed a group of teenagers loitering outside the gas station. One of them whispered, "Is that really him?" Another muttered, "Dude, he's a legend." Sly simply kept walking, one hand in his jacket, the other tracing the curve of the note folded in his pocket. As he approached his truck, he looked down the road and thought about how many more small towns were out there, how many more Amiras waiting to be seen, to be heard, to be told they mattered. Maybe that was his purpose now, not the silver screen or the spotlight, but to be the quiet kind of hero. The kind that showed up when no one else did. The kind that reminded the world that decency didn't need applause to be real. That evening, back inside Rosie's, Amira sat with her mother, telling the whole story with her hands, her face lit up by more than just excitement. She told it like it was legend, like it was truth wrapped in fire and kindness. Her mother listened, tears misting her eyes, then pulled her close and whispered, "That man, he didn't just save your morning, baby. He gave you something most people go their whole lives without." Amira tilted her head. "What's that?" "The belief," her mother said, "that your voice can change something." And in the quiet that followed, Amira opened her new notebook to a fresh page and began to write. Not homework, not math problems, but words her own. Maybe it was the start of a letter, maybe the start of a story, or maybe it was something else entirely. But whatever it was, it started like this. "Today, I met a man who reminded me that being brave isn't loud, it's quiet, it's steady, and it always stands up." And somewhere down the road, Sylvester Stallone drove on, the Georgia pines slipping past his window, and a quiet peace settling in his chest that no applause ever gave him.